Hello friends, today's my discussion is on structure of heart. So heart, that is a muscular organ and that pumps the blood throughout the circulatory system, and it is situated in between the two lungs in the mediastinum, and it is made up of four chambers, two atria and two ventricles. The musculature of the ventricle is thicker than that of the atria, and force of the contraction of the heart depends upon the muscles. Now, why the musculature of the ventricles is thicker than that of the atria? Because the ventricle has to do more work than the atria. And layers of wall of the heart. So, heart is made up of three layers of tissue: outer pericardium, middle myocardium, and inner endocardium. So, this is the myocardium, and this is endocardium, and this is epicardium, visceral pericardium, and this one is parietal pericardium, and this is a pericardial cavity. This one is fibrous layer, this is a serous layer, and again that is a epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. So first of all, about the pericardium. Pericardium is the outer covering of the heart, and it is made up of two layers: outer parietal pericardium and inner visceral pericardium. So this one is a outer covering of the heart, that is a pericardium, and there are two layers: outer parietal pericardium. This is a outer parietal pericardium, and this one is visceral pericardium. The space between these two layers is known as pericardial cavity or pericardial space, and it contains a thin film of the fluid, and that is known as pericardial fluid. Outer parietal pericardium forms a strong protective sac for the heart, and it helps also to anchor the heart within the mediastinum. Parietal pericardium is made up of two layers: outer fibrous layer and inner serous layer. So, fibrous pericardium and serous pericardium. So, parietal pericardium is made up of two layers: outer fibrous and inner serous layer. Now, fibrous layer. Fibrous layer of the parietal pericardium is formed by thick fibrous connective tissue. So, this is a fibrous pericardium. It is attached to the diaphragm. So, this is a diaphragm. So it is attached to the diaphragm, and it is continuous with the tunica adventitia or outer wall of the blood vessels, entering and leaving the heart. Fibrous layer, it is attached with the diaphragm below, and because of the fibrous nature, it protects the heart from overstretching. Serous layer. Serous layer is formed by mesothelium together with a small amount of the connective tissue. Mesothelium contains squamous epithelial cells which secrete a small amount of the fluid which lines the pericardial space. This fluid prevents the friction and allows the free movement of the heart within the pericardium when it contracts and relaxes. The total volume of this fluid is only about 25 to 35 ml. Inner visceral pericardium. Inner visceral pericardium lines the surface of myocardium. It is made up of flattened epithelial cells. This layer is also known as epicardium. So epicardium, this one is a epicardium. Then myocardium. Myocardium, it is the middle layer of the wall of the heart, and it is formed by cardiac muscle fibers or cardiac myocytes. So this is a myocardium. Myocardium forms the bulk of the heart and it is responsible for the pumping action of the heart. Cardiac muscle is involuntary in action. Myocardium has three types of the muscle fibers. Muscle fibers which form the contractile unit of the heart, muscle fibers which form the pacemaker, and muscle fibers which form the conductive system of the heart. Muscle fibers which form the contractile unit of the heart. These cardiac muscle fibers are striated and resemble the skeletal muscle fibers in structure. Cardiac muscle fiber is bound by sarcolemma and it has centrally placed nucleus. So, in cardiac muscle fiber, there is also myosin and actin filaments and its structure is like skeletal muscle. So, there is a dark band and light band. So, because of this, they appear striated. And here, there is a centrally placed nucleus. Now, sarcomere of the cardiac muscle has all the contractile proteins, namely actin, myosin, troponin, and tropomyosin. And sarcotubular system in the cardiac muscle is similar to that of skeletal muscle. So, like the skeletal muscle, there is also A band and I band, and it is sarcolemma, and this one is a sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this one is a intercalated disc, and this is a centrally placed nucleus. Important difference between the skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle is that cardiac muscle fiber is branched and skeletal muscle is not branched. So this is a branching cells and these are a striatum. This is a nucleus. Now what is the intercalated disc? Intercalated disc is a tough double membranous structure and situated at the junction between the branches of the neighboring cardiac muscle fibers. So cardiac muscle fibers are a branched fibers or branched cells. So there is a tough structure that is situated at the junction between the two branches. So this is a intercalated disc or this is a intercalated disc. So it is situated at the junction between the branches of the neighboring cardiac muscle fibers. It is formed by the fusion of the membrane of the cardiac muscle branches. An intercalated disc form the adherens junctions which plays an important role in the contraction of the cardiac muscle as a single unit. So because of the presence of the intercalated disc, heart acts as a syncytium. So it contracts as a single unit. Syncytium. Syncytium means tissue with cytoplasmic continuity between the adjacent cells. However, the cardiac muscle is like a physiological syncytium. There is no continuity of the cytoplasm and muscle fibers are separated from each other by cell membrane. So here it is a gap junction. So because of the presence of the gap junction, the action potential are transmitted very easily, and because of presence of intercalated disc. Now at the sides, the membrane of the adjacent muscle fibers fuse together to form gap junction. And gap junction is permeable to ions and it facilitates the rapid conduction of action potential from one fiber to another fiber. Because of this, all the cardiac muscle fibers act like a single unit, which is referred as a syncytium. Syncytium in human heart has two portions, syncytium of atria and syncytium of ventricles. Both the portion of the syncytium are connected by a thick non-conducting fibrous ring that is known as atrioventricular ring. Muscle fibers which form the pacemaker. Some of the muscle fibers of the heart are modified into a specialized structure known as SA node. So this is a SA node. And these muscle fibers forming the pacemaker have less striation as compared to remaining part of the heart. So this is a plasma membrane and this is a gap junction. This is a gap junction and this one is a intercalated disc and this one is a sarcomere. And this is a desmosome and this is a plasma membrane. Pacemaker is the structure in the heart that generates the impulse for the heartbeat and it is formed by pacemaker cells known as P cells. An SA node that forms the pacemaker in the human heart. Muscle fibers which form the conductive system. So conductive system of the heart is formed by modified cardiac muscle fibers. Impulses from the SA node are transmitted to atria directly. So this is a sinoatrial node or pacemaker of heart. So impulses from the SA node, they are transmitted to the atria directly. However, the impulse are transmitted to the ventricles through the various components of conducting system. Then endocardium. Endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart wall. So this is the endocardium and it is a thin, smooth and glistening membrane. So endocardium, that is the inner layer of the epithelial cell. And it is formed by single layer of the endothelial cells lining the inner surface of the heart. Endocardium continues as an endothelium of the blood vessels. Then comes to valve of the heart. So there are four valves in the human heart. Two valves are in between atria and ventricles are known as atrioventricular valve. So these are tricuspid valve and this one is a mitral valve. So these two valves are present in between atria and ventricle. So this is a right ventricle and right atrium. In between this one is a tricuspid valve and left atrium and left ventricle. In between there is a mitral valve and they are known as atrioventricular valve. This one is a tricuspid and this one is mitral. Other two are semilunar valves placed at the opening of the blood vessels arising from the ventricles, namely systemic aorta and pulmonary artery. So this pulmonary artery, they arises from the left ventricle. Now valves of the heart permit the flow of the blood through the heart only in one direction. Then atrioventricular valves. Left atrioventricular valve is otherwise known as mitral valve or bicuspid valve. and it is formed by two valvular cusp or flaps. So this one is a mitral valve and it is formed by two flaps. And right atrioventricular valve is known as tricuspid valve and it is formed by three flaps. Brim of the atrioventricular valve is attached to the atrioventricular ring and which is the fibrous connection between the atria and ventricles. Cusp of the valve are attached to the papillary muscle. So these are the papillary muscle by means of chorda tendineae and that one is a chorda tendineae. Papillary muscle arises from the inner surface of the ventricle. So you can see very clearly these papillary muscles that are arises from the inner surface of the ventricle and cusp of the valves that are attached to the papillary muscle by this structure and that is known as chorda tendineae. Papillary muscles plays that important role in closure of the cusp of cups and in preventing the backflow of the blood from ventricle to atria during ventricular contraction. So whenever the ventricles contract, this papillary muscle that prevents the backflow of the blood by closing the flaps of the valve. And atrioventricular valve open only towards the ventricle. So this atrioventricular valve that open only towards the ventricles and prevent the backflow of the blood into the atria. Atrioventricular valve open only towards the ventricle and prevent the backflow of the blood into atria. Now semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are present at the opening of the systemic aorta and pulmonary artery and they are known as aortic valve and pulmonary valve respectively. So this one is a aortic valve and this one is pulmonary valve. Because of the half moon shape, these two valves are known as semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are made up of three flaps and semilunar valves open only towards the aorta and pulmonary artery and prevent the backflow of the blood into the ventricles. Then action of the heart. They are classified into four types: chronotropic action, inotropic action, endromotropic action and bathmotropic action. So first of all, chronotropic action. Chronotropic action is the frequency of the heart rate or heartbeat and it is of two types. Tachycardia means increase in the heart rate and bradycardia means decrease in heart rate. Then inotropic action. Force of the contraction of the heart is known as inotropic action and it is of two types: positive inotropic action or increase in the force of contraction, negative inotropic action or decrease in force of contraction. Then dromotropic action. Dromotropic action is the conduction of the impulse through heart and it is of two types: positive dromotropic action or increase in the velocity of the conduction, negative dromotropic action or decrease in the velocity of conduction. Then bathmotropic action, that is the excitability of the cardiac muscle and it is also two types: positive bathmotropic action or increase in the excitability of the cardiac muscle, negative bathmotropic action or decrease in the excitability of the cardiac muscle. Thank you very much.